Welcome. Today we look back at one of the most defining events in human history, World War II. This was a conflict that reshaped nations, transformed societies, and changed the role of the United States in the world forever. What follows is not a story of heroes and villains alone, but a record of decisions, sacrifices, and consequences that continue to shape our present. This is the story of World War II. The most brutal battles of World War II, where survival was uncertain. World War II was fought across continents, oceans, and skies, but some battles stood apart for their intensity, scale, and human cost. These were not simply engagements for territory. They were fights for survival, where soldiers endured extreme conditions, relentless enemy pressure, and staggering casualties. For the United States and its allies, these battles tested the limits of endurance and revealed the true nature of modern total war. One of the defining characteristics of World War II was the concentration of violence. Entire cities, islands, and regions became killing grounds where neither side could withdraw without catastrophic consequences. In these battles, success was measured not in quick victories, but in the ability to endure longer than the enemy. Commanders committed vast resources, knowing that retreat was often impossible, and defeat could alter the course of the war. In Europe, large-scale battles consumed hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Urban centers turned into ruins, forests became death traps, and rivers formed natural barriers soaked in blood. Soldiers fought in freezing winters and scorching summers, often without adequate shelter or rest. Artillery fire was constant. Air attacks destroyed supply lines and morale alike. The battlefield offered no safety, even behind the front lines. In the Pacific, brutality took a different form. Battles were fought on isolated islands where evacuation was difficult and surrender rare. American forces faced an enemy that fought to the death, using tunnels, caves, and jungle terrain to prolong resistance. Heat, disease, and exhaustion became as dangerous as bullets. Each island became a closed world of violence, where survival depended on discipline, coordination, and sheer resilience. What made these battles especially deadly was the absence of clear endings. Fighting continued day and night. Positions changed hands repeatedly. Units were reduced to fractions of their original strength. Replacement soldiers arrived and were thrown into combat almost immediately. Medical evacuation saved many lives, but many wounded never returned to their units. Loss became routine. For soldiers, these battles reshaped their understanding of war. Courage was not heroic charging, but the ability to continue moving forward under fire. Fear was constant, managed rather than overcome. Survival depended on trust in comrades and leadership at the smallest level. The experience left lasting physical and psychological scars. These battles also shaped strategic outcomes. They halted enemy advances, broke defensive lines, and shifted momentum. Without victory in these brutal engagements, broader campaigns would have failed. Their importance lay not only in territory gained, but in the destruction of enemy strength and will. This series examines the most brutal battles of World War II, focusing on why they were fought, how they unfolded, and what they cost. These were battles where survival was uncertain and victory demanded extraordinary sacrifice. Understanding them is essential to understanding how World War II was won and why its human cost was so immense. Stalingrad, the battle that broke an army. Among all the brutal battles of World War II, Stalingrad stands as one of the most devastating confrontations in human history. Fought between August 1942 and February 1943, the battle became a symbol of total war, where survival was uncertain and victory demanded unimaginable sacrifice. Although the United States was not directly involved on the ground, Stalingrad reshaped the entire course of the war and determined the fate of American operations in Europe. For Nazi Germany, Stalingrad represented both strategic and symbolic importance. Located on the Volga River, the city was a major industrial center and a key transportation hub. Capturing it would cut Soviet supply lines and protect Germany's southern flank as it pushed toward the oil fields of the Caucasus. Adolf Hitler also placed personal importance on taking a city that bore the name of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. The decision to seize Stalingrad at all costs would prove catastrophic. The battle quickly descended into chaos. German forces entered the city expecting a swift victory, but instead encountered relentless resistance. Street by street, building by building, Soviet troops fought at close range. Rubble-filled ruins eliminated the advantages of German armor and air power. Combat took place in factories, apartment blocks, basements, and stairwells. Soldiers fought with rifles, grenades, knives, and bare hands. The front line shifted constantly, sometimes running through a single building or even a single room. Conditions were beyond brutal. Summer heat turned to freezing winter. Food and ammunition were scarce. Wounded soldiers often froze to death before receiving aid. Entire units were wiped out in days. The psychological toll was immense. Veterans later described Stalingrad as a nightmare of noise, smoke, and constant death, where survival depended on luck as much as skill. In November 1942, the Soviet Union launched a massive counteroffensive. Instead of attacking the heavily defended city center, Soviet forces struck weaker German flanks held by Allied troops. Within days, the German Sixth Army was encircled. Cut off from supplies, surrounded by enemy forces, and ordered by Hitler to hold their ground, German troops faced slow destruction. Air resupply failed. Starvation, disease, and frostbite spread rapidly. By February 1943, the remaining German forces in Stalingrad surrendered. More than 250,000 Axis troops had been killed, wounded, or captured. It was the first time a full German field army had been destroyed. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. From this point onward, Germany would remain on the defensive in the east. The impact of Stalingrad extended far beyond the Soviet Union. For the Allies, including the United States, the battle marked a decisive turning point. German resources were drained, experienced soldiers were lost, and momentum shifted permanently. American planners now understood that Germany could be defeated. Stalingrad ensured that when American forces later landed in Italy and France, they would face an enemy already bleeding heavily on another front. Stalingrad demonstrated the true scale of World War II brutality. It was a battle where retreat was forbidden, surrender delayed until collapse, and survival became secondary to ideology and command decisions. The destruction of the German Sixth Army altered the balance of power in Europe and set the stage for Allied offensives that would follow. In the history of World War II, Stalingrad stands not just as a military defeat, but as a warning. It showed how modern warfare could consume entire armies and cities, leaving nothing but ruins and memory. The war would continue, but after Stalingrad, its outcome was no longer in doubt. Normandy, Omaha Beach, and the cost of opening the Second Front. If Stalingrad broke the German army in the east, Normandy opened the door to Germany's defeat in the West. The Allied invasion of France on June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, was one of the most complex and dangerous military operations ever attempted. For the United States, it became a moment of extreme sacrifice, especially on a stretch of coastline that would later be known simply as Omaha Beach. Omaha Beach was heavily defended. German forces occupied high ground overlooking the shore, protected by concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, artillery positions, and obstacles designed to destroy landing craft. American planners understood that casualties would be high, but the full reality of what awaited the first waves could not be fully predicted. Weather, tides, and enemy defenses combined to create a perfect storm of danger. In the early morning hours of June 6th, American troops approached the shore under heavy fire. Many landing craft were hit before reaching the beach. Soldiers drowned under the weight of their equipment or were killed the moment ramps dropped. Units landed far from their intended positions, officers were killed early, and command structures collapsed almost immediately. Chaos dominated the shoreline. German machine guns swept the beach. Artillery shells exploded among tightly packed troops. Men sought cover behind obstacles, bodies, and shallow depressions in the sand. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. For hours, it appeared possible that the assault might fail entirely. Some senior commanders feared that Omaha Beach could become a catastrophic defeat. What changed the outcome was not a single decisive action, but countless acts of small unit leadership and individual initiative. Junior officers, non-commissioned officers, and ordinary soldiers began organizing scattered men into assault groups. Without clear orders, they advanced up the bluffs under fire, using grenades, explosives, and rifle fire to neutralize German positions one by one. Naval gunfire, brought dangerously close to the shore, helped suppress enemy defenses. By the afternoon, American forces had gained footholds beyond the beach. German resistance began to weaken as positions were overrun or isolated. By nightfall, Omaha Beach was secured, though at enormous cost. More than 2,000 Americans were killed or wounded there in a single day. The sand was stained with blood, and wrecked equipment littered the shoreline. The significance of Omaha Beach went far beyond its physical dimensions. Failure there could have jeopardized the entire invasion. Instead, success ensured that Allied forces could continue landing men, vehicles, and supplies in France. Over the following weeks, American troops fought their way inland through the hedgerows of Normandy, facing fierce resistance at close range. Progress was slow, exhausting, and deadly. Normandy demonstrated both the brutality and necessity of opening a second front. American soldiers paid an immense price to establish a foothold in Western Europe, but their sacrifice changed the course of the war. German forces were now trapped between advancing Soviet armies in the east and Allied forces in the west. The liberation of Western Europe had begun. Omaha Beach became a symbol of courage under impossible conditions. It showed that victory in World War II did not come through overwhelming force alone, but through endurance, initiative, and the willingness to advance when retreat seemed safer. The cost was staggering, but the outcome was decisive. From the sands of Normandy, the road to Germany lay open. Iwo Jima, the deadliest island for American forces. If Normandy demonstrated the cost of opening the second front in Europe, Iwo Jima revealed the terrifying reality of the Pacific War. This small volcanic island, barely 8 square miles in size, became one of the bloodiest battlefields in American military history. For U.S. forces, Iwo Jima was not just another objective. It was a warning of what an invasion of Japan itself might require. Iwo Jima held critical strategic value. Located halfway between the Mariana Islands and mainland Japan, it served as an early warning station for Japanese radar and a base for fighter aircraft intercepting American bombers. For the United States, capturing Iwo Jima would provide emergency landing fields for damaged B-29 bombers and a base for fighter escorts. American planners expected heavy resistance, but the scale of what awaited them was underestimated. On February 19, 1945, U.S. Marines landed on the beaches of Iwo Jima, following days of intense naval and aerial bombardment. At first, the landing seemed deceptively quiet. There was little immediate resistance. This silence was intentional. Japanese defenders, commanded by General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had abandoned traditional beach defenses. Instead, they waited until the beaches were crowded with men and equipment. When the attack came, it was devastating. Hidden artillery, mortars, and machine guns erupted from underground positions. The volcanic sand made movement nearly impossible. Marines struggled to dig foxholes, and vehicles became stuck. Casualties mounted rapidly. The Japanese defensive network was vast, consisting of tunnels, bunkers, and concealed firing positions that survived bombardment and allowed defenders to reposition unseen. The battle became a slow, brutal grind. Every yard of ground was contested. Marines advanced using flamethrowers, grenades, and demolitions to clear fortified positions. Japanese soldiers rarely surrendered. Instead, they fought from hidden positions until killed. Night brought no relief. Infiltration attacks, snipers, and constant tension deprived American troops of rest. Exhaustion and fear became constant companions. One of the most iconic moments of World War II occurred during this battle, when Marines raised the American flag on Mount Suribachi. The image became a symbol of determination and sacrifice, but it did not mark the end of the fighting. Battles continued across the island for weeks. Japanese resistance remained fierce, even as their situation became hopeless. By the time Iwo Jima was declared secured in late March 1945, the cost was staggering. Nearly 7,000 Americans were killed, and more than 19,000 were wounded. Almost the entire Japanese garrison of approximately 21,000 defenders was killed. The casualty rate shocked American commanders. Never before had U.S. forces suffered such losses for such a small objective. Despite the cost, Iwo Jima proved strategically valuable. Thousands of damaged American bombers later landed on the island, saving countless aircrew lives. Yet the battle's greater impact was psychological. It demonstrated that Japanese forces would defend their territory to near total destruction. For American leaders, Iwo Jima was not just a victory, it was a grim preview. The battle forced a sobering conclusion. If capturing a tiny island demanded such sacrifice, an invasion of Japan's home islands would be catastrophic. Iwo Jima became a symbol of the Pacific War's brutality and a decisive factor in shaping the final decisions that would soon bring World War II to an end. The Battle of the Bulge. Winter, surprise, and survival. In December 1944, just as many American soldiers believed the war in Europe was nearing its end, Germany launched one final, desperate gamble. The Battle of the Bulge became the largest and bloodiest battle ever fought by the United States Army. It was a test of endurance, leadership, and survival under some of the harshest conditions of the war. Adolf Hitler's plan was bold and risky. German forces would attack through the Ardennes forest, a region of dense woods and narrow roads along the Belgian and Luxembourg border. Allied commanders considered the area unsuitable for a major offensive and had stationed relatively inexperienced American units there to rest. Hitler hoped to exploit this weakness, split Allied armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace in the West. For Germany, it was a last attempt to change the course of the war. On December 16, 1944, German troops attacked under cover of darkness, fog, and heavy snowfall. Poor weather grounded Allied aircraft, eliminating one of America's greatest advantages. German armor and infantry punched through American lines, creating a massive bulge in the front. Communications collapsed, roads filled with retreating units, and confusion spread rapidly. In the opening days, some American units were surrounded or overrun, suffering heavy casualties. Winter made everything worse. Temperatures dropped well below freezing. Snow and ice covered forests and roads. Many American soldiers lacked adequate winter clothing and shelter. Frostbite became a serious threat, sometimes incapacitating more men than enemy fire. Soldiers dug foxholes in frozen ground, slept in wet uniforms, and fought while exhausted and numb from cold. Despite the shock, American resistance stiffened. Small units held key road junctions, villages, and high ground, slowing the German advance and buying time for reinforcements. One of the most critical points was the town of Bastogne, a vital road hub. German forces surrounded the town, trapping American defenders, including elements of the 101st Airborne Division. Cut off from supplies and under constant attack, the defenders refused to surrender. When German commanders demanded surrender, the American reply was a single word: nuts. As weather conditions improved, Allied air power returned. American aircraft attacked German supply lines, destroying fuel convoys, vehicles, and bridges. German forces, already short on fuel and ammunition, began to lose momentum. American reinforcements arrived, and counterattacks pushed the enemy back. By January 1945, the bulge was eliminated. The cost was enormous. American casualties exceeded 70,000 killed, wounded, or missing. German losses were also devastating and irreplaceable. The failure of the offensive exhausted Germany's last reserves and ended any realistic chance of stopping the Allied advance. The Battle of the Bulge marked the final turning point in the European war. It demonstrated how far American forces had come since the early failures of 1942. Under surprise, extreme weather, and intense pressure, they held their ground and prevailed. After the Ardennes, the road into Germany lay open. The end of the war in Europe was now inevitable. Okinawa, the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. As the war in Europe moved toward its conclusion, the Pacific theater reached its most violent and costly phase. Okinawa, the largest island in the Ryukyu chain, became the final major battlefield before Japan itself. For the United States, the battle was intended to secure a base close enough to support a potential invasion of the Japanese home islands. For Japan, Okinawa was the last defensive barrier. What followed was the bloodiest battle of the entire Pacific War. American forces landed on Okinawa on April 1, 1945. Unlike earlier island assaults, initial resistance on the beaches was surprisingly light. This was not a mistake by Japanese commanders, but a deliberate strategy. Rather than defending the shoreline, Japanese forces withdrew into deeply prepared positions in the southern part of the island. They constructed an extensive network of caves, tunnels, and fortified ridgelines designed to absorb bombardment and force American troops into a prolonged war of attrition. As U.S. Army and Marine units advanced inland, resistance intensified dramatically. Japanese defenders used the terrain with lethal effectiveness. Artillery fire erupted from concealed positions, machine guns covered narrow approaches, and mortars struck advancing troops with devastating accuracy. Progress was painfully slow. Hills and ridges had to be taken one by one, often at close range. Rain turned the battlefield into deep mud, filling foxholes and trenches with water and making movement exhausting. Combat on Okinawa was relentless. Japanese forces launched frequent night attacks and infiltration operations, slipping into American lines under cover of darkness. Sleep deprivation became widespread. Soldiers lived under constant stress, unsure when the next attack would come. Medical evacuation was difficult, and casualties mounted steadily. The battlefield offered little relief, and the fighting dragged on for weeks. At sea, the battle reached a level of violence never seen before. Okinawa marked the peak of Japan's kamikaze campaign. Waves of suicide aircraft targeted American ships supporting the invasion. Destroyers, transports, and even aircraft carriers were struck. Ships burned, sank, or were severely damaged. Thousands of American sailors were killed or wounded. Every incoming aircraft was treated as a potential guided missile, placing immense psychological strain on naval crews. Civilians suffered enormously. Okinawa was home to a large civilian population caught between two armies. Many were killed by artillery fire, crossfire, or bombing. Others were forced into caves by Japanese troops or driven into combat zones. The presence of civilians added another layer of tragedy to an already brutal battle. American soldiers later recalled the suffering of civilians as one of the most disturbing aspects of the campaign. By June 1945, organized Japanese resistance began to collapse. Many defenders fought to the death rather than surrender. When the island was finally secured, the cost was staggering. More than 12,000 Americans were killed and over 36,000 were wounded. Japanese military losses were catastrophic, and civilian deaths numbered in the tens of thousands. Okinawa forced a grim conclusion on American leaders. If defending a single island resulted in such losses, an invasion of Japan itself would be far worse. Casualty estimates for a home island invasion reached into the hundreds of thousands for American forces alone. Okinawa was not just a battle. It was a warning of the human cost still ahead and a decisive factor in the final decisions that would soon bring World War II to an end. The end of World War II, atomic weapons, and Japan's surrender. By the summer of 1945, World War II had reached its final and most controversial stage. Germany had already surrendered, but in the Pacific the fighting showed no sign of easing. The Battle of Okinawa had demonstrated that Japanese forces would defend their territory to near total destruction. American commanders now faced a decision unlike any in history: how to end the war without sacrificing hundreds of thousands of lives in a direct invasion of Japan. Plans for an invasion of the Japanese home islands were already in motion. The operation, known as Operation Downfall, was expected to involve millions of American troops. Military planners, drawing on experience from Iwo Jima and Okinawa, estimated catastrophic casualties. Japanese defenses were being prepared across the home islands, including civilian mobilization. The war threatened to continue into 1946, with unimaginable human cost on both sides. At the same time, the United States possessed a new weapon developed in complete secrecy. The Manhattan Project had produced atomic bombs of unprecedented destructive power. American political and military leaders believed that using these weapons could force Japan to surrender quickly, avoiding a prolonged invasion. The decision carried enormous moral weight, but it was shaped by the realities of total war and the lessons learned from years of brutal combat. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. The explosion instantly destroyed much of the city and killed tens of thousands of people. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The destruction shocked the world. No city had ever experienced such devastation from a single weapon. At the same time, the strategic situation worsened for Japan. On August 8th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Japanese-held territory in Manchuria. This eliminated Japan's last hope of negotiating a mediated peace. Faced with overwhelming force and total collapse, Japan's leadership was divided but increasingly aware that continued resistance was impossible. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito addressed the Japanese people by radio, announcing Japan's surrender. For many civilians, it was the first time they had ever heard their emperor's voice. The broadcast marked the effective end of fighting across the Pacific. Formal surrender documents were signed on September 6, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, officially ending World War II. For American forces, the end of the war brought relief, mixed with exhaustion and reflection. Millions of servicemen prepared to return home, while others remained overseas as occupation forces. The war had claimed more than 400,000 American lives and left millions wounded or psychologically scarred. Victory had been achieved, but the cost was immense. The use of atomic weapons ended the war swiftly, but it also opened a new era. The destructive power demonstrated in Hiroshima and Nagasaki reshaped global politics, military strategy, and ethical debate. World War II ended not with a final battlefield clash, but with a decision that changed the nature of warfare forever. Legacy: the cost of victory and the world after World War II. World War II ended in 1945, but its consequences reshaped the world in ways that continue to define modern history. The war was not simply a clash of armies. It was a total global conflict that transformed nations, societies, and the balance of power. For the United States and its allies, victory came at an immense human, moral, and economic cost, leaving behind lessons that would shape the post-war world. More than 70 million people died during World War II, including soldiers and civilians. Entire cities were destroyed, economies collapsed, and millions were displaced from their homes. The scale of destruction was unprecedented. For the first time in history, industrial capacity and scientific innovation became instruments of mass warfare, capable of reshaping entire societies in a matter of months. For the United States, the war marked a permanent end to isolationism. America emerged as a global superpower with military, economic, and political influence extending across the world. The responsibilities of leadership replaced the option of withdrawal. American forces remained overseas, not as conquerors, but as occupiers and rebuilders, tasked with stabilizing regions devastated by years of war. The aftermath of the war led to major efforts at reconstruction. In Europe, the Marshall Plan helped rebuild economies, restore infrastructure, and prevent political collapse. These efforts were driven by lessons learned after World War I, when failure to stabilize defeated nations contributed to renewed conflict. In Japan, American-led occupation dismantled militarism and introduced political reforms that reshaped the nation's future. Former enemies became long-term allies, demonstrating that the post-war order could be built on reconstruction rather than punishment. World War II also exposed the darkest capabilities of humanity. The Holocaust revealed the full horror of genocide carried out through state power and industrial organization. The discovery of concentration camps shocked the world and permanently altered global understanding of human rights and moral responsibility. These crimes led to the establishment of international laws, war crimes tribunals, and efforts to prevent such atrocities in the future. At the same time, the use of atomic weapons introduced a new and dangerous reality. The war ended quickly, but the destructive power displayed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed warfare forever. Nations now possess the ability to destroy entire cities in moments. The post-war world entered the nuclear age, defined by deterrence, fear, and the constant risk of annihilation. For the individuals who fought, the war's legacy was deeply personal. Veterans returned home carrying memories of loss, fear, and survival. Many never spoke openly about what they experienced. Their lives, families, and communities were shaped by the war long after the fighting ended. Monuments, cemeteries, and memorial days became reminders of the cost paid by an entire generation. World War II also reshaped international cooperation. Institutions like the United Nations were created to prevent another global catastrophe. While imperfect, they reflected a recognition that global conflict could no longer be managed through isolation or unilateral power alone. The war taught that peace required cooperation, accountability, and shared responsibility. The legacy of World War II is not only found in history books or battlefields. It lives in modern geopolitics, military doctrine, international law, and collective memory. It stands as both a warning and a lesson. The war demonstrated the consequences of unchecked aggression, ideological extremism, and political failure. It also showed the capacity of societies to mobilize, adapt, and rebuild in the face of overwhelming destruction. World War II ended with victory, but it did not end the questions it raised. The cost of that victory remains central to understanding the modern world. Remembering the war is not about glorifying conflict, but about recognizing its consequences. The world that emerged after 1945 was built on sacrifice, shaped by hard lessons, and burdened with the responsibility to ensure that such a war is never repeated. World War II reshaped the world we live in today. Its victories, losses, and lessons remind us of the cost of global conflict and the value of cooperation. By remembering this history, we honor those who lived through it and better understand the world they left behind. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.